Okay. All right. I just came here because I have to do this video really quick. Last night, after I got done trying to go through all of my birthday comments, and I want to say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you all, you amazing, beautiful people that are in this community. I just absolutely adore, love, and appreciate all you beautiful souls. I had tried to catch up on saying thank you individually to each person. If I've missed you, or you've commented today, I'm trying to still get to those. But thank you for the happy birthday wishes. I was watching the Frankenstein movie because it's out on Netflix, the 2025 Frankenstein. And of course, Guillermo del Toro is the one that did this version of Frankenstein. Now, there's been lots of versions of Frankenstein. Same thing with Dracula. The whole monster thing. They've been done time and time again. Because why? Well, people that like horror movies or just the thought of Frankenstein or vampires like Dracula, even though that's loosely based off of a real life story. I think there's something that's very timeless about those kinds of stories. It captures our imagination in ways that I think is both not only beautiful and haunting, but it can also be, it transports us, right? We love stories like that. And Guillermo del Toro has always had a beautiful way of using cinema, using film to visually capture that essence and that feeling. I came across this TikTok today. I loved the Frankenstein movie. I thought it was great. I think all the actors did phenomenal. I also loved the remake of Nosferatu. I thought that was amazing. And maybe I'm biased because I like Johnny Depp and I've followed his entire career and grew up with him. His daughter's in it, but she did a phenomenal job playing in Nosferatu. Just the visuals of that movie was beautiful. But, Guillermo del Toro, he has his own style that is just equally visually captivating and beautiful. And when it comes to Victor Frankenstein, you see him go from being this man of science, the man of his time, and you see him be consumed not only by his own madness, but literally by his own creation. And it's visually beautiful and haunting. I think there's a different take on it. And all the actors, I think, did phenomenal work on it. I think it was different. And I think the reason why is because Guillermo del Toro, even though he's known, very well known in Hollywood, Hollywood, for making films that are visually captivating and breathtaking and beautiful and really give you this emotional, mental, even physical sense when you see them. I think that the reason why he's able to do that is because of who he is, because of his culture, because of all the things that he experienced throughout life. He does film in a way that nobody else can. I'm sure people can try to, copy or mimic his style and his vision. But I think his life, his culture, his experiences, I think that is what makes his movies so phenomenal. But I saw this TikTok and I want to talk about it because and no offense to this woman, I do not know who this creator is. She seems really intelligent and beautiful. But I just noticed that there's a lot of big buzzwords and salad words that are going around the internet when it comes to these critiques, commentaries, reactions, and it's almost dumbfounding to me. So hopefully we can hear this. Okay, for some reason, my PC does not want to play this video, but I have it on my phone, the same video, and I'm going to play it and pause because I want you guys, tell me your thoughts.
I want to talk about the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican identity from discourses and critiques of the new Frankenstein movie and the erasure of Mexican cultural production.
She wants to talk about the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican identity and movie production from the critiques and criticisms in the discourse. Okay. No matter what culturally you are, okay, Hollywood, the biggest film studios in America are in America. So when somebody comes to America to become a filmmaker, or they're doing things, whether they're Mexican or Korean or Japanese or Chinese, and they're doing English films, that right there is going to be automatically, it's not erasing anything, but I feel like when he could choose to make whatever film he wants to, right? He can choose to make films in Mexico, or just with all Mexican based scripts, all in Spanish, all with Mexican actors and actresses. But the fact is this is an English American based film, even if Guillermo del Toro has whatever his culture is, you know what I mean? So that's like, it's like trying to say that the discord around it's an English film. And so anybody that speaks English, of course, can watch this film. It's not based specifically in, like, the script itself is not based in Mexico or anything. So I don't understand, like, trying to erase what? It's not personal to who Guillermo del Toro is. His life experiences, of course, make him a phenomenal cinematic storyteller, visual storyteller. And that's a touch that nobody can take from him, or try to copy or replicate or recreate or copy, mimic, whatever, plagiarize. But purposely trying to erase him, what? The erasure of Guillermo del Toro, his Mexican culture, postcolonial context, and critiques and discourse. Because the movie Frankenstein has nothing to do with his actual culture. Correct me if I'm wrong. So why would people make it personal about his Mexican culture or heritage, religion, when it's not based on that? I don't understand how that's trying to erase that. Like, I don't get that point. But she continues on.
From the literary and film canon, and from the consciousness of the world at large. And why white...
From the film canon and the consciousness of the world. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? I mean, it's like intentionally using all of these really big words because, oh, I look really super intelligent and really smart and superior IQ'd by using all these big words. But really, when you break it down and listen to it, it's like, what are you even saying? What are you trying to say? This kind of movie, because it is Hollywood based, because it's in English, is actually international and worldwide for all of the English speaking audience. And I'm not going to talk about colonialism because, you know, there's 195 countries on planet Earth. 56 of them or so belong underneath the British United Kingdom Commonwealth. So that's 1/4 of all countries on planet Earth are still today, even if they have their independence and have their own prime minister and their own parliament and have their independence, they're still considered to be underneath the British Commonwealth. But what does that have to do with film? What does it have to do with the story of Frankenstein? What does it have to do with Guillermo del Toro and people that love the film or didn't like the film and they're critiquing the film? What does that have to do with his Mexican heritage? And how is that people trying to erase it? The film is not about Guillermo del Toro, his life, his story. If it was, then it would make sense if people were trying to gloss over or erase or skip over his Mexican heritage, but I just don't get that. I don't get this analysis. And I'm not saying anything personal against this woman. She's beautiful. She sounds very intelligent and smart with her vocabulary. But it baffles me. It baffles me.
Feminist criticism of this film is not only insufficient to take into account the post-colonial context that Guillermo del Toro is working within, but has ironically become very bioessentialist in its calls for a woman director to take over.
Okay. Post-colonialism that Guillermo del Toro is working and existing in. All 8 billion people on planet Earth are existing in a post-colonial world. All of us. All 8 billion people across 195 countries, across 7 continents, right now in 2025, are all existing in a post-colonial world. And I'm just going to say this. Spanish and Portuguese as a language, a spoken verbal language, is as indigenous, as aboriginal to the Maya, Aztec, Inca, as English or French is to the indigenous Native Americans in North America, Canada. The reason why the Maya, Aztec, and Inca have Mexico, Central, South America, the Aboriginal people, why they speak Spanish and Portuguese there today, because Britain wasn't the only, or even at times, the main colonialist. The French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French. Why do you think in Canada they still speak French? Large areas still speak French. In America, English. Mexico, Central, South America, Spanish, Portuguese. And there's also a lot of islands where the Dutch still technically own the island. And if you're not familiar, the Dutch, that's the Netherlands, okay? The Kingdom of the Netherlands still has a lot of the islands. A lot of the islands from North America, Mexico, Central, South America. Okay, Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin. There's multiple different islands that, here in the New World that the Dutch still own. So that is, everybody in Canada, North America, Mexico, Central, South America, every little island around the Americas we're all living, even the whole world, we're all living in a post-colonial world. We're all existing in a post-colonial world. We're all living and breathing Homo sapiens in a post-colonial world. So, what? I mean, I thought this was going to be a deep dive or something in context of how Spain and Portugal nearly wiped out the Maya, Aztec, and the Inca, the same way the British almost did the Native Americans of North America. I thought it was going to dive more into real Mexican culture and history and the colonial times of Mexico, Central or South America, what Spain and Portugal did, especially bringing Catholicism, spreading the word of Jesus, the same way that British, French colonialists did here in Canada, North America. I thought this was going to be a detailed deep dive into that because she's talking about the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican culture, post-colonial. So I thought she was going to go pre-colonial or during the colonial times and talk about Mexican culture and how it came to be. Therefore, where Guillermo del Toro grew up or what he's a part of. But this seems to be anything but that. This seems to be a very, very extreme. And I'm just saying from what I'm picking up. I'm picking up that this is an extremely left-wing type of analysis here. Because this is using all of the big buzzwords that are meant to frighten people, scare them.
So it's important to situate our literary works in the historical time period and world that they were written in. So Mary Shelley publishes Frankenstein in 1818 anonymously, and then publishes it under her name in 1831. At this point, we are in the Romantic period of English literature, and it is...
And we can remember that the original story of Frankenstein was written by a woman, a British woman, right? Okay, it's that simple. So Frankenstein, even though Mary Shelley, of course, during, the early 1800s, and she's British, okay, now, first and foremost, you got to think about how the story was written. It doesn't matter if it's a, posthumous type of gothic, romantic type of feel. With, same thing kind of with Dracula, with the mortality, living forever, with this relation to death. And what that does to the soul, or absence of the soul, but the emotion surrounding that. Okay, yeah, she's going into the context of the original writer, author of Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. Early 1800s, she's a British female. Okay, but what does that have to do about the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican culture and heritage? Because when he chose to do his adaptation, I should say, of Frankenstein, what does that have to do with his personal culture? Other than what that does is his personal culture, religious beliefs, experiences, life, his career. He's bringing that, his touch, his uniqueness to cinema, to film, visually to tell a story. To not just tell a story and to show it to you with eyes, your eyes, but to give you a sense of what it feels like. Like even the snow, you feel the cold. You feel the goosebumps on the back of your neck starting to go down your arms. You feel that. He's great at that. But I would say that his Mexican heritage, his life, his experiences, his religion, his career, all of that, his wisdom, his expertise, that has a lot to do with why I think the film was so good. But what in the hell does this adaptation, this remake of Frankenstein, what does this have to do with Guillermo del Toro's Mexican culture and heritage? What she's doing is using this to go into the original story, the woman who wrote it, and British culture. That's what she's doing. If anything's erasing Guillermo del Toro's Mexican culture and heritage is you didn't go into that at all. You're choosing to go into the colonial culture and heritage at that time. So while she's saying that people are erasing his Mexican heritage and culture, she's kind of doing that by not talking about it. She's talking about Mary Shelley, the original author, the original writer.
A direct sort of product of the post-Enlightenment era of literature, or the Renaissance era. And in this time, there's an enormous swell in the study of the sciences. And so you get taxonomies like this. And
yes, not only was science, but medicine. Even becoming a physician was a new thing in the early 1800s. Newer. Lots of technologies. I mean, we weren't even going through the industrialization. So yes, that was new at that time.
In 1831, Mexico published one of its very first novels, The Mangy Parrot. Also, at this point, Mexico is a brand new country, and they have been subjected to this kind of racialization. So one way to look at the periodization of literature is as a development of consciousness, and as the Romantic period.
The way to look at literature is through the development of consciousness. What? Okay. The development of consciousness.
It was starting to kind of kick off. Over in the Americas, you have the Transcendentalists and Phyllis Wheatley, all writing about nature. While the Romantics are contemplating deep time and existence, the Transcendentalists are coming up with rugged individualism.
So instead of going into the actual culture and everything of Guillermo del Toro and the erasure that she's claiming of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican heritage and culture, she's actually going into British. Forget about the other colonialists, like, the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and those are the two you really want to focus on, because when it comes to Mexico, Central, and South America, a lot of the islands, they still speak Spanish and Portuguese in Mexico, Central, and South America today, because Spain and Portugal were the colonialists the same way Britain was to North America, right? She's going into their heritage and culture because she's going into the original author and literature that had started Mary Shelley writing the Frankenstein story. So, do you get what I'm saying here? Do you get what I'm saying? It's kind of like she's erasing his Mexican heritage and culture because she's not doing a video about that. She's doing a video opposite of that. Deep diving how the Frankenstein story came to be. And maybe that's what's interesting to Guillermo del Toro. Maybe that's why he wanted to do his own adaptation of it. How about, instead of deep diving and critiquing all of that, you actually get into the film, what you liked or didn't like about the film. And you can do so in much simpler terms than using all of this crazy big word salad and rhetoric that they love, especially the mainstream media, love to throw around. And I noticed that, this is my own personal opinion, a lot of really, really far left liberals like to use a lot of those big words. Because what it does is it's essentially what, not comparing everybody to, or a political party to narcissism, but I'm just saying this is what a lot of narcissists like to do. They like to verbally, with their words, get you so confused in these big circles and bog you down. Get you so to the point where you're like, I can't even mentally, emotionally, physically, like, even listen anymore. Because not only am I so disconnected from all of the mumbo jumbo that you're saying, but it makes me so now desensitized and just disinterested in what you have to say, that you're just like, whatever, say whatever it is you're going to say. But when you really look at the actual context of what is being said, it's a whole lot of nothing. And it's really weird to label something as other people are doing this, but you're actively doing it as well.
But this is when both the British and American literary canon start to build a sense of the world on erasure. Plants become isolated.
So Britain starts to build a sense of the world on erasure. But Britain has nothing to do with the colonial era, pre or post, of Mexico, Central, and South America. That would be the countries of Spain and Portugal. And if you want to talk about Mexican heritage and culture, then you really need to talk about that truthfully, in a truthful historical context, about how the Spanish and the Portuguese did the same thing that the British did. The British weren't the only people that brought smallpox over here and committed the biggest genocide ever by killing over 60 million Native Americans in North America alone with this deadly bacteria and virus that they brought. But the Spanish and the Portuguese did the same thing to Mexico, Central, and South America. So to really get a sense of because if you're going to talk about the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican heritage and culture, then you really need to get into the opposite of that. His Mexican heritage and culture. But I don't see that. That's what's so confusing to me.
From their origins, and others begin to be depicted as monsters. Colonialism has given the British consciousness a sense of the other as monstrous. And we see the beginnings of this in Caliban in Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Is it possible that no matter who wrote the story, no matter what religion or culture, nationality that they have, okay, or skin color, okay, no, put all that aside, even the gender of the person that created the story of Frankenstein, is it possible, just possible, that Guillermo del Toro, I mean, if we were to email him and reach out to him for comment, for verifying or corroborating, right, Would he say that maybe it was just the story that captivated him and that he wanted to visually bring a different life and a different side to it? Maybe it has nothing to do with his Mexican heritage and culture. In fact, I'd say that his Mexican heritage and culture is probably the most unique and beautiful thing about how he tells stories cinematically. And that's the beautiful thing about diversity. But I don't think that's erasure, because the story of Frankenstein was written by a British woman in the early 1800s. Of course, she, at that time, is likely going to only write from the capacity of her own life and experiences from where and which that she lived and experienced things. So it's not like this woman in the early 1800s is going to be writing this monster story for future Mexican culture and heritage, because she might not know about it or have even experienced it, obviously, because of the time frame of which she lived and wrote the story. Is it just possible that Guillermo del Toro likes the idea of monster stories, beautiful, captivating monster stories? And maybe that's just one of them. And maybe it's just that simple and that logical.
Paradise Lost, the monster starts to evolve away from Satan and more as a moral interrogation of self and other. So while Mary Shelley is writing about these like wondrous new developments in the sciences, slaves, indigenous people, and disabled people are being experimented on in the Americas and in England.
Okay. But if you're going to talk about that, you have to include what Spain and Portugal did to Mexico, Central, and South America, and the Caribbean islands. You have to talk about the truth and historical context of what was done to the Maya, Aztec, Inca. Just saying. Because the culture and the context of which Guillermo del Toro's culture and heritage comes from does not stem from a British post-colonial context.
And so when we get to this scene, what produces this scene, both in the book and in the film, is a global moment of experimentation on enslaved, indigenous, and disabled bodies.
Actually, that's incorrect, because Victor Frankenstein needs the perfect, not disabled, not diseased, not deformed in any kind of way. He needs perfect specimens to be able to create this perfect being and be able to reanimate it back from the dead. But unfortunately, when people become deceased, especially during that time of many, we have a war every 10, 15 years globally, but within the context of how people died largely back then, it was either bacteria, viruses, or it was usually in some violent physical way in war. And that's why he needed perfect, pristine, healthy, young bodies, not disabled bodies, not these deformed or disease-riddled bodies. He needed perfect specimens to be able to, and of course that's a problem if somebody dies and they don't have, part of an arm anymore. You can't use that full body. That is the story and the essence of Frankenstein and how he was pieced together with a whole bunch of perfect bodies. But the reason why is because when people die in war and they're hit by a bullet in war, that damage of which that person died damages that part of the body. So it's really going into more about science than it is about disabled people using disabled, diseased bodies, because it was actually quite the opposite. Victor Frankenstein needed pristine, perfect body parts to be able to construct this perfect Frankenstein, this monster.
This is the body that the progress of science is built on. Now here it's represented by Jacob Elordi, but the actual sort of bodies that are behind it are...
Now that is true. Science did do that, okay? During World War II, we know what the Social Nationalist Party of Germany did. We know what they did. with their abuses of the Jewish people. And we know that with science and medicine, they did a lot of experiments. Because with that is how a lot of physicians came to learn anatomy. You can't learn it if you don't study it. And yeah, there was. That is true. But it has not a whole lot to do with the story of how Frankenstein came to be. So that doesn't have a lot to do with how Frankenstein came to be.
Enslaved bodies. And side note, the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, who performed horrific experiments on enslaved women, is practicing around this time. He began practicing.
Okay, she goes on this whole entire spiel about different gynecologists that were studying the female human anatomy at the time.
The sort of critiques of the film are that it is overstated, overdramatic, that it is oversimplified, that a woman should direct it, that it needs to be put into a woman's hands. As if Guillermo...
Who said that? Who said that? Just because a woman wrote the original story, that's sexism to even say that or even implicate that.
Toro were like some kind of like white male patriarch with like a significant amount of power in Hollywood.
He does. He's a fantastic filmmaker, and it's really not just unique to his culture, his heritage, his life experiences, his religion, his family, all of the things that made him the wonderful visual creator and storyteller that he is today. A lot of that probably is attributed to why he is an amazing visual storyteller today. But when you choose to work in America with Hollywood, in American studios, film studios, and bring these movies to an English-speaking audience in an English-speaking way with these English-speaking actors in America, you can't say that anybody's trying to erase who he is, because this doesn't have to do with him personally. He is telling a story that is separate from him, separate from himself. He is the one that is utilizing some of the biggest film studios in the world in a nearly universal language. And yeah, thanks to Britain, because if it wasn't for their colonialism of, 1/4 of all the countries on planet Earth still today are underneath the Commonwealth of the UK, English wouldn't be understood globally as a universal type of language. So when you choose to work within Hollywood and bring movies into English, you can reach more people internationally. Maybe that's all he's doing. He wants his stories, his movies, to be able to be as big as they can, that people can enjoy them anywhere. And I'm sure there's even versions that are, with subtitles and audio that they can be dubbed in other languages for people that don't.
Now, don't get me wrong. He's a household name. He has done very well for himself, beyond what most Mexican writers and creatives are able to achieve.
Now, see, if he was just working in Mexico and only telling Mexican stories with Mexican actors and actresses out of Mexico, like Mexican-based film studios, then, that's his choice. That is Guillermo del Toro's choice. And that's the one thing that's beautiful about working or living in America, is that he can make that choice of how he decides that he wants to make films. And I don't think it's anybody's right to try to limit that, or try to verbally try to force other people to limit that, because that really ultimately is his choice. What film he wants to make, how he wants to make it, and how he makes it.
Political landscape. But it is a product of Mexican history and Mexican consciousness nonetheless.
But that's the thing. He made an American-based movie in English. Straight out of Hollywood. So what does that have to do with Mexico? The only link there is the fact that Guillermo del Toro is Mexican.
And this is why I think
That he has
traditional white
Mexican
feminist
culture and
critiques
heritage.
are failing to sort of really capture what's going on with this film. And why any feminist critique that is lacking a post-colonial or global South context is insufficient to speak to this moment. Binary gender and gender itself is a product of empire. And flattening it down to just a gender issue, like, oh, a man made this, a woman should make it, is actually the same bioessentialism that created all of our systems of oppression.
Bioessentialism. Is that even a word? You're just throwing words together now? Oh my God. What was that? What was that? Guillermo del Toro grew up in Mexico, where his childhood was spent being raised by his deeply religious grandmother. He was fascinated by monsters and horror from a young age, filling notebooks with drawings and developing a love for horror comics, books, movies that clashed with his grandmother's strict Catholic upbringing. Do you know why so many people in Mexico, Central and South America are Catholic? I don't know. You should ask their colonial list, Spain and Portugal. Because, you know, if you're going to talk about the context of his history, you got to talk about the context of his culture and his history. You have to talk about how Spain and Portugal literally was wiping out the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, and enslaving them and taking their chieftains and literally forcing them to convert to Catholicism or wiping them out. You know, but she doesn't go into that. She wants to go into British colonial history. You know, this would have been a perfect teaching moment to go into history and really tell how Mexico, Central, South America became colonized by Spain and by Portugal. And why they speak Portuguese and Spanish to this day. And not the indigenous language of the Maya, Aztec, and Inca who inhabited Mexico, Central, and South America. Now, of course, he is very beloved to people that love horror films and the horror genre. So somebody outside of that might not understand his body of work. But I would say, and it even says here, the intense and sometimes terrifying childhood that he had was marked by what he calls lucid nightmares and encounters with death, heavily influenced by the themes of his later films. That's why I say his heritage, his culture, religion, absolutely is the reason why he's such a fucking phenomenal filmmaker today. But his films are not about him, about his life, but that's just what shapes how he makes films. And that's amazing. That's the most beautiful thing about him, is that uniqueness, that diversity that he brings to his storytelling, how he captivates us with a camera in ways that we never thought was possible, even with sound, with the actors that he works with.
Edward Said's concept of narrative domination, or essentially how empire produces itself in culture. So this is like history, science, medicine, literature, art, the way we think about people, the way we categorize and separate people into hierarchies, right? Which story...
Okay, and you're separating people by saying Mexican culture. What? How are you going to blame people for being a stereotyping people and then actually be making a video about just that? I don't understand. I'm not understanding what this has to do with what she's trying to claim. That's my whole point.
Histories are remembered. Which histories are remembered? Who gets to tell them?
Whoever tells history should be telling it truthfully, not omitting what they don't want people to know, recognize, or see, but objectively telling a history as it occurred and happened. Every person that tells a history should be doing that.
Start to see how British Empire sort of like has dominion, has narrative domination over the world, over how the world thinks, over what works of literature are remembered and get to persist over time.
Guillermo del Toro has the right to make whatever film he wants to. And if he wants to revive an obscure story from some female British writer 250 years ago. He has every absolute right to do that. But what does that have to do with British colonialism? Because British colonialism isn't even linked to the time of which Guillermo del Toro was born, lived, and raised, okay? In Mexico. You'd have to look to Spain and Portugal, the colonization of Mexico, Central, and South America. But she's telling the story of Britain.
Domination makes everything into a woman to conquer. So let's look at the term like virgin land. That makes the land into a young, beautiful woman ripe for the conqueror to come in and in a colonized territory, even men have a lower status than the white women who, have the benefit of being of empire. I think part of the draw of medieval to Victorian literature is the manners, the gender roles. Women get to be women, whereas in post-colonial territory,
which was completely standard, not for just the early 1800s, but all the way through the 1900s, even to today. As much as people want to yap, and act like they're so revolutionary and so extraordinary and so unique and so different. You're really not, because at the end of the day, a lot of these people still, while saying they don't believe in traditional gender roles, a lot of people still strive to be a wife, a mother, have their own career, have a husband, because that's just biology. It's just the way that people, and it doesn't matter if you're husband, wife, people still have their own ideas of what they want their role to be, or their spouse's role to be within a family unit. And that's fine. That's fine.
Men are feminized and women are masculinized, and both are exploited for their labor.
How are they exploited for their labor? Men and women are biologically different, and that's not only okay, that is a strength. It's not a curse, it's a gift. It truly is. Does that mean that every wife has to be a stay-at-home mom? Absolutely not. Nobody said that. But there's just differences between women and men, physically, aesthetically, biologically. That's just fact. How does that have, those biological differences have to do with exploitation of labor?
So this is where the feminist critique begins to fail. So when Guillermo del Toro says that he relates to Mary Shelley and has a young Victorian girl inside him, he meant that shit. And this is actually where the rejection of Guillermo del Toro starts to hurt a little bit, because we have to imagine ourselves within the dominant narratives of empire in order to exist. We don't have our own literary canon that is global in the sense that the British canon is. That's why.
Then create it. I would love nothing more than for Mexico to actually have their own film studios and actually work at making that as big for Mexico, Central, South America, Spain, all the countries that everybody globally that speaks Spanish or Portuguese. And there you have it. It sounds like she's mad that Guillermo del Toro has that choice to work with American studios and make an American-based film with American actors and actresses and make it in English. Sounds to me like she wants to say Guillermo del Toro is erasing his own Mexican heritage and culture. And I would beg to differ, because I think that's what makes him an incredible storyteller. And I believe that everybody exists in post-colonial times, all 8 billion of us, whether we want to or not. We are here post-colonial. So that's just a given. And I think as far as context of critiques and criticisms and discords, well, everybody has the right to their own thoughts, feelings, expressions, opinions, critiques, criticisms. It sounds to me like she doesn't like the fact that a very big name Mexican filmmaker is not choosing to do Mexican-based stories, or bring them to life, or to bring them to a larger audience, or do, I don't know, maybe even do just all Spanish films. Maybe he didn't want to, but that's his choice. That is his choice.
He says him being Mexican is in everything he does. And
absolutely.
with its sort of like overly Catholic sort of imagery and rich color, also deeply humanizes the monster. And now, why would Guillermo del Toro want to humanize a monster in this particular moment? Also,
because he was made up of human.
To criticisms of Victor Frankenstein's accent. Doesn't he speak multiple languages as a child, primarily French? It sounds fine to me, but I wouldn't know. I'm Mexican. And it made me think a lot about the double standards that people who are non-English, Latino specifically, right? The sort of scrutiny that they're up against when we interpret the English canon wrong. I mean, like, love him, but Peter Dinklage is from Jersey, and as much as I love Tyrion, was his accent good? I don't mean to pick on Peter. He did great.
What does their accents have to do with anything?
Guillermo del Toro's Mexican identity from Discourses and Critation.
Okay, so she goes on to talk about other actors and actresses in the film industry and in movies and TV shows, especially very big popular ones like Game of Thrones, how they're acting to have this British-based accent, which is critical to the story of Game of Thrones. What does that have to do with the erasure of Guillermo del Toro's Mexican heritage and culture?
With its sort of like overly Catholic sort of imagery and rich color.
And what does religion really have to do with it, other than what I've already explicitly stated several hundred times in this video?
Accent. Doesn't he speak multiple languages as a child, primarily, right? The sort of scrutiny that they're up against when we interpret the English canon wrong.
So it sounds to me like she's just mad that Guillermo del Toro decided to take this story that has been retold by multiple different filmmakers and storytellers globally since it was originally written in the early 1800s by men and women, and they've done their own interpretation and adaptation of it, both on paper and on film. And that's all of a sudden this Mexican male, very well known in the horror genre especially, filmmaker Guillermo del Toro, all of a sudden he's held to a standard that other people aren't. Because he's Mexican? I don't know, but that sounds like discrimination to me. And it sounds like her problem isn't with people, other people. It sounds like her problem is that he's not choosing to do Mexican-based stories and Mexican-based films in Spanish with Spanish-speaking, Mexican actors and actresses. And if that's what you want to say, just say it. It's really that simple. I thought he did a phenomenal job. And I'm sure that Frankenstein will be, with video streaming and everything today, you can have all different kinds of audio dubbed over in a different language that will automatically translate it. They do it for not just people that are, have hearing or vision impairments, but they also have subtitles that are done in all the different languages for anybody worldwide. So it doesn't even matter if the movie was originally shot and filmed, by a Hollywood studio with American actors and actresses in English, because they can accommodate today anybody globally. But everybody knows that Hollywood is the biggest film studio and machine that there is. And of course, that's how filmmakers truly get the budgets that they need. And unfortunately, even if he wanted to do that in Mexico, maybe he just doesn't have that ability to do that because those film studios, those budgets don't exist there for him to be able to work in that capacity. And that's, of course, goes back to post-colonialism of America today, that land of the free, right? That you can come here, you can become a citizen, you can live, you can thrive, you can make your dreams come true, and you can make movies and tell stories in the way that you choose and see fit. And people can either love them or they can hate them. And it's as simple as that. I thought it was a beautiful story. I just love the fact that Frankenstein, like his color palette, changes throughout the film, but he never fully matches the living, breathing human. And then you see, Victor Frankenstein. You see Dr. Frankenstein go throughout the film of having this idea of, of science and becoming a doctor, a physician, and studying human anatomy and all of this ideas and everything in his brain. And you see him bring it to life. So that's all I had to say. I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. What did you think about this critique and criticism? What did you think about her trying to overwhelm you and bog you down with all these big salad words and these big circle jerk? It is a circle jerk of words. The human centipede of words. So it just gets you confused and like, okay, she sounds smart. She looks smart. She's a beautiful girl, beautiful woman. But what is it meant to really say? And when you really get into it and you really get into analyzing things, you really find out that this is more about her insecurity. Maybe in relation to her own Mexican heritage and culture. I don't know. But maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's just resentment that another very famous Mexican filmmaker is not telling, Mexican-based stories with Mexican-based artists, actors, actresses, and not choosing to do Mexican-based films in Spanish, which is their language, majority, or Portuguese and a lot of, Central South America. But like I said, the video has nothing to do with actually going into the colonialism of Spain and Portugal on Mexico, Central, and South America, and what they did to the Maya, Aztec, Inca, and how Mexico became a country, and how Mexico then set the pre-colonial and post-colonial stages. Because if you're going to talk about pre-colonial, you have to talk about the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, and those civilizations and their Aboriginal language. But if you're going to talk about it, during or post, which is now the time we are all living in, you have to talk about it in context of how Guillermo del Toro grew up and how did that change the way that he chooses to adapt and tell stories. And that, to me, is what makes him such a phenomenal filmmaker, such a phenomenal storyteller. Captivating. And I think he has every right, no matter what his heritage or culture is, to make whatever film he sees fit. Now, if you have a problem with that because he's not doing it in the way you want him to, then, I would highly suggest that's something more internal going on than it is actually having to do with people trying to erase the Mexican heritage and culture of Guillermo del Toro. Because I don't think that at all. I think him adapting that in the way that he chooses to tell a story visually is the most beautiful thing about his heritage and his culture. Because he can draw from those experiences that he's had, his heritage and culture, the way that he grew up, all of it, to bring us such a phenomenal, visually beautiful way that he story tells. Like The New Frankenstein. I highly suggest you go watch it. But let me know what you think about this. And this is no hate towards this beautiful woman at all. But this is giving me very, very, very far left liberal type vibes with how they try to overanalyze. They try to get into all the itty bitty nitpicking, some over getting into the semantics, overanalyzing the semantics. And then, but when you really break it down piece by piece, it makes no logical sense. No logical sense. But that's all I have. Let me know what you think down below.